Welcome to this week's episode of Growing Guelph. This week on the podcast, I am talking to Yasi Zorlutuna. Yasi's a chef and the creator of Community F.E.W.D. Community F.E.W.D is a mobile food security initiative that centers dignity, quality, and accessibility while diverting high-quality foodstuffs to the landfill. I really enjoyed this conversation with Yasi. It's quite the long one, so I hope you enjoy it too. I'm joined by Yasi Zorlutuna. Yasi, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Thank you for inviting me into your home to sit down at your kitchen table and record. Is this your first podcast?
Yeah. Being on a podcast. I've definitely listened.
That's fair. It's a different experience being on this side of the mic, but I think if I'm good at this, which I don't claim to be, but the microphones, the computer, the headphones should sort of disappear and it should just be a conversation between us. I'm excited to have this conversation because, as you know, I've been volunteering with Community F.E.W.D. and it's actually pronounced food. And I do that every single time. I know until it's Community F.E.W.D, but the F.E.W.D, I can't help it. F.E.W.D, Community F.E.W.D. Thank you. So let's kick right off into that. Could you maybe share with our listeners how Community F.E.W.D came to be, what sparked the idea, and where do you think the need for this initiative came from, and like what brought you to doing this today?
Yeah, I feel like my whole life has been bringing me to this place right now. I mean, I've been working in food for over 20 years now. It was really this initiative was inspired to fill a need in the food security world and in the food surplus world. I was at like a chef's conference that I was sent to while I was working at the University of Guelph. And there was a speaker there and he was from, I can't remember which state it is, but in a state where throwing away usable surplus foods was becoming illegal.
So does that mean businesses they had an obligation to find something to do with the food that they didn't use?
Exactly. So they were required. It was becoming legislated that it was, which in some European countries, it's like that. You cannot throw away usable food. You have to donate it.
It seems almost like one of those laws that it's like a no-brainer, but like everything, capitalism, you have to regulate it. Otherwise, they'll do the cheapest thing, which is throwing the food directly into the trash and not making sure those calories are used for what they were grown for.
100%. But the challenge is that because the commercial food system really is built for profit, surplus food and throwing things away is built into that system.
Yep.
So it's just assumed that you're going to have extra and that it's going to be discarded because actually, we are fed this like scarcity mindset in our society, but the earth is actually abundant and food is abundant. And when you grow food, for anyone who's ever had a garden, I remember the first time I had a community garden, we made the big mistake of planting 4 zucchini plants. And that was just 4 plants. And there was like a period of time where it was like, if you came to our house, you had to take at least 1 zucchini with you.
Yeah.
So we live in an abundant world. And this abundance ends up being disposed of by producers. And it's just built into the cost of
people
doing
saw
business.
That. I know there was a lot of outrage of people not familiar with our quota system for dairy and how it works. And then when COVID happened and there were restaurants that were closed and people were seeing maybe for the first time video of milk being dumped like straight into the garbage, like thousands of gallons of milk, because the quota system will not allow excess to go to market because that would disrupt the price. So
and that's so interesting that you bring that up because that is like the story that everybody goes back to because that was like, it was like an expose. It was like the veil was lifted and everybody was outraged. But so many of us who work in food, chefs, farmers, distributors, anybody who works directly with food, knows that that happens all the time.
Yep.
That kind of stuff happens all the time. This isn't new. It's not just because of COVID. Like that specific incident obviously was because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But this kind of stuff happens all the time, and it's actually built into our food system. So going back to how this program came about is that when suddenly businesses are faced with having to find somebody to take their surplus foods, we don't have a variety of channels or solutions.
Yeah.
Like right now, the solution is so stuff either gets dumped, composted, or it gets donated to charity, right? And so there's all this rhetoric around donating to charity and how that's so great. And yes, of course, it's great to donate to charity. But what's actually happening when the quantities of food are so huge and like milk, the time is so limited.
Yeah.
It's actually what it's doing is it's downloading this problem onto volunteer run charities.
Yeah.
So many of these organizations that receive surplus foods from grocery stores or farms or distributors, wherever, they are small volunteer run charities, groups of people who come to this work out of goodness in their hearts because they want to help their fellow humans, and they want to help people, and they see that there's so much abundance, yet people are going hungry. But so what this speaker at this conference that I was at, the chef spoke about was that there's so much food, like so much. And he literally said, and these are the words that are like ingrained in my mind and what led to this initiative. He said, chefs, I need your brains on this problem because it is a huge logistical issue. And as chefs, that's what we do is we rescue food actually every day. You know, people now with the Food Network, you know, everybody has this shiny idea of like what chefs do. Like, you know, we create this beautiful menu and we use these fancy little pliers to plate these gorgeous plates. But actually, chefs, what we do is that we think fast, we pivot, and we're constantly problem solving. So even like a restaurant, catering company, any food business that has a set menu, you order in your food, you order in your ingredients, like you would think anybody who doesn't work in food or doesn't have that sort of intimate knowledge thinks like, oh, well, you order your food, you make your food. Why would there be waste? Why would you have to be making split decisions all the time? Well, the reality is when you're working with food in a commercial way, there is always something that's happened.
Yeah.
Your supplier is late. They don't come. They brought you too much of one thing. They didn't have something else. The cases of, you know, tomatoes that they brought you the tomatoes are bigger. They're smaller. Half of them are rotten. These ones aren't ripe. So you're or the fridge broke.
Yeah.
Your staff didn't show up. There was a flood. There was a power outage and we had to throw everything away. There's so many things that are constantly happening in a kitchen, and we're constantly having to adapt in the moment, in real time.
Yeah.
How do we reach this goal with all of this chaos that's happening? So I call myself a chaos coordinator. And as chefs, we're constantly, like I used to joke that I was a firefighter. Like I basically am putting out fires everywhere I turn. We are sort of the perfect food rescuers.
I'm sure the problems or the chaos that you described there is made more intense in the sorts of restaurants that I'd say people in Guelph want to support, like the sort of community-driven restaurants that are trying to locally source all of their ingredients. When things are locally sourced, it's when you'll have some of those minor supply chain issues. Something's late, something's delayed, there's not enough of something. Those sort of kinks in the chain are probably easier to work out if you're McDonald's and you're trying to make sure that you get like the thousands of pounds of potatoes you need at your facilities to process the potatoes, to send things. Like you can squash all of that. But if you're a restaurant, like something trying to work with local vendors, trying to keep all that, then I can imagine that the chaos just means that you have to be more of a problem solver. You have to be more of a think on your feet type, right?
100%. But I would say also McDonald's is dealing with that stuff all the time too.
Right.
In
just
fact,
different signs.
In fact, in some ways it may be harder for them because McDonald's has a requirement of, tomatoes that are exactly this shape and this ripeness. And if they get, all the tomatoes they get in are too ripe, they can't put it through their vegetable processing machine that slices their tomatoes. Whereas a restaurant can say like, oh, because we're hand slicing our tomatoes anyway for our sandwiches, or, oh, the tomatoes are too ripe. We're going to make a tomato soup, or, we're going to oven dry some tomatoes, or we're going to oven dry the tomatoes, and then we're going to make a sun-dried tomato pesto, and then we're going to freeze it, so sometimes a smaller business is actually more adaptable. And so when it comes to surplus foods from the food industry, it's not coming from restaurants. So there's this idea of like rescuing food from restaurants. Yeah, there's a bit of like surplus food, but most of that is actually coming from industrial sources. So McDonald's would say to a supplier who shows up with a skid of tomatoes, perhaps, obviously I'm indulging the truth. I don't know that this is true. But like if Cisco shows up and McDonald's says, I don't like these tomatoes, they can turn them away and say no. And that supplier has to bend over basically and take it, because McDonald's is paying a huge amount of money to them every week or every month. And then, so what does that supplier, that distributor do with this entire skid of tomatoes that they've put aside for McDonald's? So then they turn around and then they have to find somewhere to donate it to. So they call food bank, their local food bank, or their local food rescuer, like the Seed, who I work directly with. And suddenly a charity that is mostly volunteer run, that is small, is receiving an entire skid of tomatoes. And if you want to think of that in terms of volume, like if you think of like moving boxes, a medium-sized moving box full of tomatoes, imagine 100 of those.
Yeah.
And so how does a food bank or a small food charity that is volunteer run turn around and redistribute all of those tomatoes? They're not set up for that. First of all, most of them don't have the space to store it. The places that do have the space to store it, like the larger places like the Seed and like the food bank and other like more large warehouse type food redistribution places, they do have the space, but they're running into the same issues that like those tomatoes have a shelf life.
Yeah.
So you don't have a week to like have meetings, consult people, think about ideas. Like somebody needs to come up with a solution immediately. And that's what chefs do. So community food was basically designed to intercept those large quantities of perishable food that need action immediately. That other groups, like, sure, somebody could go through 100 boxes of tomatoes and pull out the ones that are going to last for a week and the ones that need to be cooked. But think about the amount of labor that goes into that. So that might take, for example, with the food bank example, that might take all of their volunteers for the entire day to go through that skid of tomatoes.
Right.
So, but what about all the other food? And when you think about that skid of tomatoes, that's small scale. We're talking about skids and skids and skids of food.
And there's also the demand from the people who are looking to make use of those calories. They have preferences about, when you go to a food bank, you're not going just saying like, I'm going to leave here with 10,000 calories and I don't care what it is. Because if you were to leave with 10,000 calories of just tomatoes, that doesn't make sense. That's not how people actually consume food. So it's almost like as a chef, your challenge is to take the food in its raw, like caloric form and its separate ingredients, and then transform that into meals where at the end of the day, there's like real demand and use. And there's a lot of skill that goes into that transformation. I mean, I've seen it just from my time volunteering with you, that those decisions and those fires, like you say, you're putting out.
It is transformation. Absolutely. Like my work mostly is logistics. It happens to involve cooking, but it's taking one thing, moving it to another location, processing it, changing its form, and then distributing it and getting it out to people. So it's it's moving something around and transforming it in the process. And for community food, like our goal, the goal of this program and sort of this initiative is about getting that food into people's stomachs as opposed to getting it into storage. Because if you talk to anybody who works in food rescue, that storage is the biggest issue.
Yeah.
So, because lots of people say, oh, there's all those tomatoes. Well, you make sauce, like you make this, you make that. Well, now you have to store that sauce.
Yeah.
And now you have to, and it's like, it's not a solution. So then it's just like freezers and freezers and freezers full.
Yeah.
And it's still not getting into people. So when that chef said that, chefs, I need your brains on this problem, I really took that and ran with it. I just kept thinking about how do we get this food into people? Like it sounds a little nasty, but like, how do we stop this food from ending up in landfill? Because we have limited time. And as chefs, we're constantly like, oh shit, we have so much of this, or got to use this before it goes bad. Like that's why there's specials at restaurants, you know, like soup special, or like the best way actually to run a restaurant is to not have a menu and just cook with what's available and what you have. And that's sort of this like very like high end, you know, farm to table thing. But that is actually, in my opinion, how we should be eating all the time, and how like what's available, what's in season. Like part of the reason that we have all this surplus is because there's this idea that like, well, I want to have my raspberries in February in Canada. Like, what the fuck, man? Like, are we like, we're so removed from the reality of where our food comes from that just that is considered reasonable is wild. Like I like to joke that we live in the upside down. Like everything is ass backwards. You know, even you go back like 50 years, even 100 years saying like, but I want raspberries in February. Your grandma would have been like, well, that's nice. I want a Christian Dior dress. That doesn't mean I'm going to get to have it, you know, but we live in this, like, at least here in North America, in this pocket of privilege, this idea that it's like our right to have raspberries in February.
Well, it's like
it's perpetuating this system that is abusing humans. It's abusing the planet. It's killing us, literally.
And people grow up with that. Like the norm is, oh, you can get anything you want any time of year. I'm sure it's a little more expensive sometimes, but it's there. It's at the grocery store. And it's, like you said, it's such a new and foreign concept of having like what you eat and what you get at the grocery store be in some ways just completely out of sync and out of alignment with what the local farmers are growing, what's in season, what's like, it feels like so, and you can still see it, like our cultural traditions have these ties to food for specific reasons, like certain food for certain times of the year. And we hold on to those a little bit, but we're also, like you said, so spoiled with the idea that like, no, we live in a global market and we have these demands of any ingredient under the sun should be available to us. I guess you can get into the shoulds of freedom or whatever. Like, I'm not saying people shouldn't, you know, want certain things, and that it's interesting that we live in a global market that can fulfill those demands. I don't think it can fulfill those demands without long-term consequences that we're now seeing and living through.
100%. When it comes down to it, you know, the work that I do, I think it's important. It is still like, it's just a Band-Aid. You know, it's just a Band-Aid for an issue. I actually think that trying to make a profit off of food is unethical. I think that is one of the things. It's not everything, but that is the root cause of these issues with our food system. Because the food system is set up for profit. And the only way, and I will tell you this as someone who's been working with food for 25 years, the only way to make a profit off of food, off of feeding people, is by exploiting the planet and exploiting people.
I mean, there's some arguments that all profit is in some way exploitation.
100%. I'm an anarchist, so I mean, I agree. I
think people can, there's arguments to be made to like, it's a complicated world we live in, but should housing be a commodity? Like these things that are essential for our lives, food, housing, other things that under our current system, the only way they exist is as a commodity, which means that, someone's being exploited. Either it's someone's labor that's being underpaid or the ownership of something. And it's, I don't know. I think in some ways you could describe community food as being a Band-Aid, but it's a necessary Band-Aid. And if it's sort of like people say that about like, oh, why would you hand money to someone on the street? Yeah, that might not solve their problem, their bigger problem, but it's going to solve their immediate problem.
But it's filling a need, yeah.
And we can't just ignore immediate needs to solve bigger problems, because then people starve, people go hungry. Like, absolutely. Everything requires a bit of both. And I think we also have to solve the problems and the challenges that we can.
I am also very interested, while I say that community food is a Band-Aid, like I think that this, taking surplus food, transforming it, and then feeding communities with it is a Band-Aid in a way, because really nobody should be going hungry. We live in an abundant world. But I am also very interested in changing the systems. Like, I think we all know this, that it's not just about this solution or that solution. We need systemic change. Because the systems we exist within are actually working perfectly. They're working as they should.
Yeah.
But they are set up for people to make money. They're not set up for humanity. They're not set up for respecting the planet and our limited finite resources that we continue to extract. The fact that, there's no like cost considered, like financial cost, for taking anything from the earth. I remember when the second time I went to university and dropped out, there was a few times, I studied environmental science. And I remember this one teacher talking about the economics of it. And I just thought we talked about, like, can you imagine, like, if the economics of exploiting the planet were added into the cost of things? Like, for example, like right now, cutting down a tree is free. It's free. But it shouldn't be free. Like, if you were to factor in the fact that it's going to take 100 years for that tree to grow back, and all these resources and all this water, if you were to put a price on that, and you were to say that, that, let's just pull out a number, that tree is worth $1 million, then nobody's going to cut that tree down.
Yeah.
And that we're not going to be making paper out of trees.
Yeah. I mean, that's
like we're going to grow hemp, and we're going to grow flax or whatever grows quickly to use more efficiently. It's the fact that we take and we don't replenish.
Yeah.
We're not in an exchange, which is how we're meant to.
That's what I've heard people talk about, like trying to factor in carbon pricing into things, where we haven't been factoring it in for so long that companies and like they just get used to the idea of operating under those parameters. But like you said, it's climate change and all these things, like they are real there, and the things these companies do have an impact. So their true cost that they're occurring isn't being accounted for anywhere. And now when we try to account for it, there's a lot of resistance to it, because
people are outraged. But it's like, and even if you take it down to the micro level of the restaurant, people are outraged that they have to pay $20 for a burger.
Yeah.
Our food at restaurants, it is subsidized by people's lives, literally, by the people who grew the food, by the people who are working in the restaurant, people who transported it. Like, the true cost of that burger on that plate, like, how can you even put a cost on that? Like, that person who's working in the restaurant is paying for your burger by being paid only like $17 an hour or whatever it is, that low wage. They are subsidizing your cheap meal. And the farmers who grew that food, and God knows where in the world they happen to have been imported from this week. Last week it was from, somewhere in South Africa. The following week it was somewhere in South America. Like, who knows? Like, where did it come from? And like, what is the true cost of that?
Yeah.
And our food is subsidized by people's lives. I had this teacher in high school who used to say, and she changed so many people's lives. She said, like, in North America, we are drowning in other people's blood, in Indigenous and Black blood on this planet, because everything was built on their lives, like their literal lives and their backs. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
No, I mean,
I'm going deep here.
I should have expected this conversation to get deep because it's food, right? Like, it's so critical that it's...
And food is like, ultimately, like when I think about it in terms of like costs and paying for things, and food should be considered a service. Like, it's just a service that you provide to people. No one's getting rich off of food. Like, people who are running restaurants, who are, people who are chefs, like, we are artists.
Right.
We come to this work because we can't help ourselves. Nobody wakes up one day and says, like, I want to work every weekend and holiday, make no money, have no time for my friends. Mm-hmm. And, anyway, like, it's not this fanciful lifestyle that comes along to it. It's because you're drawn to it.
Right.
As an artist. Like, I consider myself an artist who works with food. If you're making money off of food, that's because you're selling alcohol.
Right.
In your restaurant. You're making money off of alcohol or off of coffee, because those are items that you can mark up. Mm-hmm. If you were to really mark up the food to the cost of its true cost, then the food would be more than what people are willing to pay. I mean, in North America, people who go to, like, say, Australia or different places in Europe, and they're like, oh my God, like, the food is so expensive, with this, like, self-righteousness. But it's because people get paid there more. Mm-hmm. And yes, you're going to pay for it. We have this idea that it's like, again, like the raspberries in February, mm-hmm. that it's like our right to go out and have a cheap burger for dinner. No, it's not our right.
Yeah. It's the same thing as saying it's your right to fill up your gas tank and drive hundreds of kilometers.
No.
And have it be cheap because why? Like,
this is the upside down, where we're so disconnected from where things come from.
So I guess maybe understanding more about that, some of that connection, and that we're challenging that disconnection. Tell me about the name Community Food. What does food stand for, and how does it reflect your core mission and values?
Sure. So food is spelled F.E.W.D. It stands for food equity with dignity. So the equity piece is really about meeting people where they're at. One of the pieces of community food is that we are mobile. So we take the food to people who want it, as well as we're able to within the parameters that we're existing right now. It was originally visioned as a food truck. We just haven't had the money to have a food truck, to get one and to maintain one. And when I got the initial money, I just figured out that, we can do a lot of this without an actual food truck. But so that's the equity piece, is that instead of like asking people who are already struggling to feed themselves and their families, because let's be honest, food security, it affects so many people. It's not just, folks who are unhoused. There are people who work full time. People who work for a living, like working poor, people who are on disability, seniors, people of limited income. And so asking people who are already compromised to then have to travel somewhere to access a service is challenging. It's not accessible to everybody. If you work full time, like, you can't go to the food bank or go to another meal program that's in one place. So with our take home dinners, we travel to different locations throughout Guelph. The idea being we're bringing it closer to people. Yes, people do still have to travel to where we are, but we go to the West End Community Center. We serve in the ward, and then we also serve at Trinity United Church, which are all like sort of different locations within Guelph. The original idea of the food truck is that we could just travel around, and like, that dream's not dead, but we're just, as a chef, I'm just adapting to what I have and doing the work within the confines of the resources that I have available to me. So that's the equity piece. So it's about taking that food to people. And then the dignity piece is that we give people the opportunity to make a donation for that food when we take that food into the community. We do not solicit money from people. We don't ask for money. But if people would like to contribute towards the food, then we provide them with that opportunity. Mm-hmm. That's it's a very nuanced thing, because not everybody wants something for free. Yeah. And taking things for free is a barrier for some people, especially people have pride. Mm-hmm. people who are working and maybe worked their whole life. They might, have served their country or, like traveled here from another country where they had so much and had to leave it. So taking something for free is challenging. And it's not everybody wants that. So giving people the opportunity to contribute, it maintains people's dignity. And the other thing is that we operate very much like any other food business, like a catering company or a food truck. And we treat our customers like customers. We treat you with the same respect as if you were a paying customer coming to a restaurant or to an event, and giving people a choice of what that food is. Going back to what you said about how, just because you're going to the food bank doesn't mean that you want 10,000 calories of straight up tomatoes. And I think that choice, that ties into both the equity and the dignity piece of like giving people a choice. So when we serve food, we have a variety of dietary options. So we'll always make sure that there's vegetarian or vegan food. If our meat is not halal, then we'll make sure there's that. We'll always have meat. We'll have a gluten-free option. We make sure that there's a salad. So that's like a fulsome meal. It's not just, this is what you get. You get what you get and you don't get upset kind of idea. So food is like a Venn diagram. So we're 3 overlapping circles, one of them being like food rescue, the other circle being food security work and care work. And then the third circle is food services. So like catering, restaurants, like we operate within the parameters as if we were a business, like a food business. We're not operating differently because we're a charity. We are treating people as if they are in the same way that a paying client is treated by a for-profit business.
Right.
So we're sort of in the middle there.
I'm curious, do you feel or have you felt any increase in pressure of ensuring that the food is getting to the, I'll use air quotes here, the right mouths, the right people who quote unquote deserve it?
So I hate that shit.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. If somebody wants the food, they are welcome to it. And people can take as much as they want. We ask people when they come up, how many people are you feeding tonight? And usually it's one person that will come from the family. And sometimes they're like 6 people. I'm feeding 6 people. And then we'll ask, like, do you want it packed up family style? Do you want it packed up like by individual meal? Do you want to take an extra meals home to put in your freezer? So it's going back to that, what we were talking about, this like idea of scarcity versus abundance.
Right.
So we operate from an abundant mindset. And it's so interesting that you asked that, because so many people, when they come for the first time to one of our meal services, we'll say, well, how many people are in your house? And they'll be like, oh, well, I don't want to take too much.
Yeah.
Like that is actually the standard. People will say, well, I don't want to take away from somebody else. So actually, it's really beautiful to see that when given the opportunity, people are actually generous. And that this idea that there's not enough and that some people are deserving and other people aren't deserving, that again, that is a story that we are told. It is like a mindset that we are brainwashed into. Yeah. This like fear mongering, scarcity, there's not enough. Act like we live in an abundant world. There is more than enough food to go around. Yeah. I think for everybody.
It's a story that the rich are happy to sell to us, because it means that often people who have a little bit more than nothing can turn around at the people who have nothing and say, like, well, we can't give them more because there's not enough to go around. If they make more money, then do I need to make more money because I can't make minimum wage? Like
it's like that image with the CEO and then the middle class and then the poor person with the cookies. The CEO, he's got a plate of cookies. And then the middle class person has like 3 cookies on his plate. And then the poor person has like crumbs on their plate. And the CEO is saying to the middle class person, he's trying to steal your cookies. Yeah,
exactly. And there's the idea
so it's like pitting people against each other.
And it's the idea that we live in that scenario, like a
world where
there's not enough cookies. But if that is the case, it's one that's been artificially crafted.
100%.
The scarcity of it, the diamond company hoarding their diamonds because they know that diamonds aren't worth, or they're only worth what the scarcity demands of it.
And I mean, it is a story that we're sold. A lot of food banks now are shifting their models to not having to necessarily prove your quote unquote poorness, that you're poor enough to access this. And I really
see the barriers that would cause, like even psychologically for the people who need the food. Now you're forcing them to grovel. You're forcing them to debase themselves and
that's the dignity piece, right? Mm-hmm. So for some people, they will not go and access that service even though it's available because it's not dignified.
Yeah.
They don't want to have to prove themselves. And I always think, because people say well, what if there's what if there's not enough? What if we run out? When we run out, we run out. We aim to make a certain amount of meals, and it's very rare that we run out. And if we run out, we run out. And next time we'll bring more.
Yeah.
And it's not a big deal. And this idea that people are deserving or not deserving, if somebody's asking for something, they need it. Mm. And if they hoard it a little bit, you know what? They obviously need that. Because it's also just it's not about what you're deserving of. It's who am I to judge how many calories everybody should get?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about mental health, about feeling secure that you have that food in your house, that it's my security water in the kitchen. I don't know if you know about the security water.
I don't.
That we always have a pot of water boiling on the stove. Mm. It's my security water because if I need boiling water, it's there.
Right.
Half the time it boils away slowly over the day. At the end of the day, we do mop with that boiling water. Mm-hmm. But it's I just need to know it's there in case I need boiling water.
Yeah.
Because if I'm cooking a bunch of pasta and I'm I'm in a time crunch and I need more water boiling, to wait for that water to boil is a stress for me. So I have my security water on the stove. It's maybe somebody needs their security meal in their freezer to know that it's there if they need it. And I also think, when people talk about some people are greedy and they'll take advantage. And I think, let them take advantage. Let them take more. Let them take what they need, because eventually they're going to come around and they're going to say, you know what? This has been so good for me. They've given me so much. You know what? Maybe tomorrow, I'm going to take less. Or it's the same thing with people donating, right? Because people really, when I started talking about this, were well, if you don't make people pay, then nobody's going to pay money. And then people are just going to take it for free. And I'm we then let them take it for free. Mm. Because if somebody comes every time for a year and they never donate money, one day they're going to be you know what? I have an extra $5 today. I think I want to give that. It's agency, right? It's to choose for themselves what they want and what feels good, and allows people to grow, and for people to grow out of that scarcity mindset too. I mean, for some people, it's really real. Scarcity is real. They don't have money for groceries. They don't have food in their fridge. That scarcity is real, but it is fabricated by the system that we exist within.
Yeah.
Because there is more than enough to go around. I actually think that everything should be sold on a sliding scale, and we should pay based on what we have. Mm-hmm. If I can afford to pay $5 for something and someone else can afford only to pay 50 cents, I think that they should be able to get it for 50 cents or for free. And for Joe Schmo millionaire who's got a yacht, and 5 cars and 3 houses, he should pay $500. Mm-hmm. And, call me a communist, but why are we all paying at the same level when we're not all coming to it from the same place?
I mean, it kind of comes to a similar argument about taxes, where sometimes people will argue I pay my fair share. Why should I pay more than that? Because you only accumulated the wealth because of the system that is in place that worked in your favor and
off the backs of other people.
Exactly. There's no one, the idea of, not only is there no such thing as a self-made millionaire or billionaire, the concept doesn't even make sense. You can't be a billionaire if you live on an island by yourself and never interact with anyone. You only have capital because you're existing within a system that others built before you. So your trucks run on the roads that other people built, on the buildings that other people built, and the society that colonial powers build. That this goes back to even bigger questions of the colonial powers that got here and found a continent that was like wiped out by disease and some partially intended diseases that they purposely spread, and said, oh, look at all these great places to live that they weren't using before. So, well, they were using it before. You're walking into like an apocalyptic scenario that, well, that's a bigger topic, I guess, for
it's
another day. But, you know,
AOC says you don't make $1 billion. You take $1 billion.
Yeah.
You take that from other people. And that's like when I say that your meal is subsidized by other people's lives. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like that cook who made your burger doesn't get to spend, dinner with his family.
Yeah. Does a sacrifice.
Because he's subsidizing your meal with his life, with his time.
Yeah. The truck driver who's
exactly
being exploited for their time and their labor. And it's
exactly
sort of exploitation all the way down.
It sure is. It sure is. And I think so coming back to food, the food piece in the food equity with dignity is that food is one of the things in this world that unites us all as beings. Every life form needs some kind of food, and food for humanity anyway. It unites us across socioeconomic backgrounds, across race, across culture, across age. We all need food, and we all understand food. We all interact with food. We all make food. It's something that brings people together. And it also provides an opportunity, I believe, for learning. And it provides an opportunity for people's minds to be a little bit opened up to ideas and concepts that maybe the door is like shut hard and locked in other realms.
Yeah, I think that's a good way, because there's so many cultural traditions on the sharing of food, and it would probably be considered rightfully very odd if you went to someone's house for dinner and then afterwards asked them like, oh, what do I owe you for this meal? Like, can I pay? Like, aside from just can I contribute towards a potluck or whatever, that's different. But trying to monetize it down to that level would be seen as like a violation of the social rules.
Yeah, 100%.
But that's not like if you go out for dinner at a restaurant, oh, now you have an easy way of splitting it. Like, oh, I'll pay for this, you pay for that. And it's, again, like monetizing it all. When you were talking about the not worrying about, tracking whether it gets to the quote unquote like right people, really kind of made me think about, like, you used the word greed and how does greed really exist? Or like I've come to this realization over the last couple of years around the word lazy, in that, like, is laziness describing an actual phenomenon like in human hearts, or is it capitalism denigrating like a behavior that it doesn't want? So people say,
100%.
You're being lazy as a way to describe like someone who can't work, or for whatever reason they aren't doing the thing that capitalism wants them to do, so therefore they are lazy. And greed somehow falls into the same camp, where it's like, does greed exist in a moneyless society? Like, sure, there might be some people who inherently kind of want more, but is that not something that's just solved when they look at their neighbor and they say, oh, you're hungry for this thing that I have here? And then I don't know. It's a not fully formed thought, but
I think it's that greed is rewarded in the culture that we are within. Like, when, as a parent, like you're raising your children. Yes, children are greedy. I want all the cookies. Some children are more greedy than other children. Some people, like, I can tell you with my 2 children, and I won't name any names because I don't want to cause any conflicts. But, one of my children by nature wants to share everything all the time and has always been that way. The other child is more like wants to keep things more for themselves, and it's hard for them to share. So, greed it's like a naturally occurring thing within humanity.
Yeah.
And, a lot of us are, like, I really believe, like, being a parent, it really changed how I view humans. Like, we come into this world with a personality and with tendencies and with skills. And yes, many things are also nurtured, but there are also just, you're born with certain things. And so the way that the culture that that you and I find ourselves within, this like white supremacist colonial North American disaster, greed is selected for. If you are greedy and you hoard things for yourself, you are rewarded.
Yeah.
You end up with more. And you don't feel, and it's like it's celebrated. Whereas like in cultures that are more communal.
Yeah.
Like I grew up in a culture that is very communal. Like I have a Turkish background, and I spent every summer with my extended family in Turkey. And I remember, and my sister and I, we grew up in North America, and we were definitely more greedy. And I remember my cousins being like, why are you like, because like and also, you know, it's also kids. Like my mom never bought us treats, like
right.
chocolate and pop and stuff like that. But my dad would give us everything, you know, all the chocolate that we wanted. And so we would be like, oh, this chocolate, we're hoarding it. And then our cousins would come over and they'd eat our chocolate. We'd be like, no, don't finish it. Like, that's mine. And they would be like so offended. Like, why would you keep it? There's so much. Mm-hmm. It's like this. And because they were raised in a way where you share everything. Mm-hmm. And like a lot of people talk about that some people will give you the shirt off of their back.
Yeah.
And I would say that one of my children is like that. They will give you the shirt off of their back because they came out of the womb that way.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know, how we've selected for certain behaviors. Mm-hmm. And hoarding. Like, I think one of the biggest problems is hoarding.
Yeah. All of, 10,000 years of society is in some ways a crucible that has rewarded those of our ancestors who greedily hoarded, mm-hmm. because the ones who gave everything they could to the community
didn't survive.
Yeah, and it's much more complicated than that. Like, if you want to look at things like the selfish gene and things like that, like there's very good reasons to not be selfish within your own community. But if there's two communities and one of them does everything, like one of them acts selfishly for their own community and the other one will gladly share everything with neighbors that come by, it's not hard to see how the more aggressive, greedy one might be outcompeted, might be forced into.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But to get us back to the idea of community food, like, what were some of the biggest hurdles that you faced when you were looking to start this organization? And maybe you could talk through overcoming some of that.
I mean, I think really it was just about time and resources. Mm-hmm. So I was able to launch this during the pandemic, mm-hmm. because I was laid off from my job. So I had time. It had sort of been formulating in my mind already, and I was starting to explore the possibility of creating this initiative. But I was working full time, so I didn't have time. And then during the pandemic, I was laid off, and I got my $2,000 a month like everybody else, which was like friggin' dreamy as a chef. And so I was able to really focus on the details of this program and connecting with people. And I started talking to people in the food security community in Guelph. And I started volunteering with the seed and just started developing those relationships. And then we applied. I was connected with the Guelph Neighborhood Support Coalition, which is a charity that we're a part of. And we applied for a grant. We didn't get it. And then we got some money. And I would say that we're still we've just started. I wouldn't say that we're at a place where, we've got it all figured out. Like, mm-hmm. really our biggest challenge is resources and having money to pay myself and staff and core staff to be able to run this operation in the way that it needs to be run. Because one of the challenges is there's this idea that like should just be volunteers, but we can't just rely on volunteers for everything. People need to be compensated for their time, and also in order to make an operation like community food work efficiently all the time, it has to be run by people who are committed to it all the time. And unless you're independently wealthy, nobody's like working for free that hard. Yeah.
It's interesting, that idea of it should just be volunteers it strikes me as a similar phrase that people would say about minimum wage work, where they say, well, of course you can't survive off of minimum wage. It's not meant to be survived off of. That's for teenagers. It's for people looking for a little bit of extra income. Like, they create these little scenarios of, oh, well, that type of job is for someone where it's okay. They don't need to support their family with it. It's their spending money. It's their saving money for college. Like, but then they have that idea, but then it's like, well, look around the world. Like, is every single minimum wage job staffed by high schoolers working part-time? Should high schoolers be working part-time? Should, like, if everything should be volunteer run, then, like, okay, so when those volunteers need money to live, like, who's paying for that? Like, it's a tricky, I don't think it's a very realistic. It's something that ignores the actualities of most people who are volunteering their time. They're doing it because they have the excess somewhere else. Like, they have the ability to volunteer their time because their needs are being taken care of by someone else in their life, someone else in their family, money that's set aside, another way, like, you know what I mean? It's
or they're unemployed and they're looking for experience, or they're a student.
Exactly.
And they have time and they want to meet people, or like a lot of our volunteers are like retired or semi-retired adults, you know, who are comfortable enough to live that they want to contribute. Or it's like students, like, who want to connect with their community, or it's people who want to do good, people who care, people who are called to service, to be of service, which is definitely a thing for me. I feel very like I've always had a calling to be of service, even like as a cook and a chef, like working in the industry. It's very much, I come to it from a place of like, I love to feed people. I love to share and to create that like connection and that space of that breaks down barriers and to be of service, you know, and some people really, they see the value in that. And I think that once as a human, as a person in this society, when you experience that of being of service and what that gives you, which I think it connects you to your humanity, which is being bred out of us, that you're like addicted to doing good and to helping.
When you're focused on that key part of the service of it, you're almost by definition going to be aligned with what really matters to people versus the polar opposite of that service. Like, if you're just an investment banker or something, I mean, even that, when you get right down to it, like, investing is useful for companies, and someone has to do the due diligence, and it's a whole thing. But like, there's something to be said about having that be your primary motivator as serving others versus looking for the rewards and then figuring out, okay, what can I do to get that reward?
Well, I think it kind of ties back to greed too. It's like some people are motivated to do things, and we're all different, right? Everybody's different. Some people are motivated to do things for their own gain, for what it does for them. And some people motivated to do things because they want to connect, right, with other humans. Because some people really see that, they crave that like connection, social connection with other humans as being valuable. And I guess you could make an argument that like that's greed too, because it's serving your like those needs.
I think that's where the definition of greed falls apart, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, is it being greedy to satisfy is every breath being greedy for air? Like,
well, this is where I feel like we are very much in my lifetime. I see us, at least in the North American context that I exist within, we're seeing this. People are starting to be able to hold two things at the same time. That I feel like it's not just black or white. It's not just greed and generosity. You can be both.
Yeah.
We can be more than one thing at the same time. We don't have to choose either or. I think that that's a really like profound change that I have seen in my lifetime, and I hope will continue to grow, that people understand that it's like you kind of like, you can't have one without the other. And there is like these extremes are just, it's a story. It's like the story of scarcity versus abundance. You know, it's a story that we're told that we live in. Yes, scarcity does exist, but it's not everything. And abundance exists, but that's also not everything, right? So everything exists in relation with multitudes, right?
Mm-hmm. Can you provide a snapshot of the different programs that you run?
Sure. Yeah. I haven't talked about that at all.
Yeah. So I understand there's food distribution, community meals, educational workshops.
Okay. So what we do, so I would say like community food is like a logistical operation. We operate kind of like a catering company, if you were to sort of like try and simplify. But so we do a couple of different things. We do take-home dinners. So take-home dinners are like sort of the food truck model where we go out a couple times a week and we set up in a community location where people can come get a hot meal and take it home. It's like takeout. Mm-hmm. And this is where there's like multiple options. You know, there's like a meat, there's a gluten-free, there's a vegan, there's a salad, and people either bring their own container or they borrow one of ours or multiple containers based on how many people they're feeding. So that's the take-home.
And that
dinner.
Model is, you sort of referenced it earlier, where it's not a cost for those dinners?
Yes, it's free. We say free or by donation,
Gotcha.
But we don't solicit money. We don't expect money. We don't ask for it. We just have a little thing at the end that you can like slip $1, a couple dollars, or $20 or 25 cents, whatever you want. Mm-hmm. So that's the take-home dinner. And then we also do community meals. So we prep community meals for other food security groups.
Okay. What
so that's like groups? It's like catering. So your downtown Guelph friends, they serve a hot meal to our unhoused and vulnerable community downtown every Sunday. So we prep a portion of that meal for them. So it's 200 meals. And then they work out of the same kitchen, and then they come, they reheat it, and then they distribute it. So we prep that meal. And we also do that for another group called Food Uniting Neighbors that does a free lunch every Friday in the Onward Willow neighborhood at the Shelldale Community Center, along with some other community programming. So we prep that food for their Friday lunch. They come, they pick it up, then they take it to their kitchen. They reheat it. They add things. And then we also provide soup to the Sanguine Health Van. So Sanguine is an awesome harm reduction service in Guelph. They have a mobile health van that goes around, gives out harm reduction supplies, coats, snacks for unhoused and vulnerable populations in Guelph. So we make them soup twice a month. We put it in little containers and they freeze it, and then they can hand that soup out to their people. We are also going to be starting now. We're going to be providing prepared frozen meals for Wyndham House, which is a youth shelter in Guelph. They have a number of different locations. They're shelters for youth, and then they have a youth hub. And then sometimes we provide some frozen meals to another shelter in Guelph that supports women and children who need help for various reasons.
And do you also provide catering services? If I owned a business and I said, I have the money, I can pay, do you do full, let's say like normal catering?
Yes, absolutely. So then the other thing we do is we do catering. So we do a lot of like someone's running a workshop, or it's a work meeting or an event. Usually it's like work type meeting things. And you have a budget to hire a caterer to cater the lunch or the dinner. We've catered for like Guelph City Hall. We've catered for multiple just like charity groups and campus groups.
Is the cost of that for them, is that considered like a donation, or is it just like they're paying for the service?
They're paying for the service.
Right.
So they're paying for the service, but we charge a significant amount of money more.
Yeah. I mean, as all catering places do, right?
Yes,
you don't
we charge
for the cost of exactly what it
we
costs to do.
We charge for catering.
And places know that their money that they're paying for does fund.
Yes, that
enables the other initiatives.
Fund. Yes, like that's the social enterprise aspect of community food, where we're selling a service, and then that money gets reinvested into our food security work. So when we're catering for like a business or for a community group or an organization like that, then we charge catering prices. So what another caterer would charge. But if we're doing like for your downtown Guelph friends and for Sanguine and for Food Uniting Neighbors and other, if we're providing food to other community groups who are feeding food insecure people, then the cost is significantly less. It's way, way less.
It sounds like...
And some things we don't charge money for. We just do it for them.
It sounds like all of this must require a delicate balancing and an understanding of all the numbers on your part to know what you're able to do. Because at the end of the day, you logistically have fees that are associated with running the business, like everything, all the costs that go into it. So does it all come down to you, or like,
pretty much. I have like Christine, who is my manager, my kitchen manager. She definitely helps a lot. She helps more like on the ground with going to events, organizing on the ground, like doing the work, but all the background stuff is me. We are also like a placement for a Master's of Applied Nutrition student. So every semester we get a placement student who's with us for like 3 months, and they basically work full time with us. And these students have been amazing and integral to our functioning since we started having them, because they're like, they're young, but they have like chosen a vocation and they're very motivated and have relevant experience. And their program, the second year, I think, of their program, they do 3 placements. So we're one of the options for food services management.
That's cool.
So it's a different kind of experience than like the other food services management would be doing a placement at like a hospital in their food services.
That must also, you're probably in the building phase with that, but down the line, that'll pay dividends in terms of you get this opportunity with these people when they're young, early in their career, but then they go off and they continue to have full careers, but they will probably always remember you and always like, you'll have these connection points and you'll have these champions for your cause.
Amazing. Yeah,
dispersed within the wider system, right? Which is only going to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And they learn, like those students, like they learn so much and they help us so much. And yeah, it's definitely a lot of things to organize and manage. But again, it's like as a chef, that's just what we do. We organize people, places, and things. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And the thing that works about community food is, as I said before, like we operate like a food business. We don't like, yes, we are a part of a charity and we are a social enterprise and we're a food security initiative. We're food rescuers, but we operate like a food business. And a food business is, if you've ever worked in a successful restaurant or bar, I mean, so many places open and close within the first year. So I'm saying successful, when you work for someone that's been around for a long time, you know that they run a tight ship and that whoever's in charge is very organized and on top of a lot of things. And the thing is, once, like for me as a chef, once I'm in a kitchen cooking things and I have ingredients, for me to actually do food for other things like these community meals, it just slides right in. Like to someone looking from the outside, you might think like, oh, wow, that's a lot. They're also doing that. And that's a lot. That must be a lot of work. It is more work, but it's not as much more.
Right.
It's like people say like going from 1 kid to 2 kids is like 10 times the work. But going from 2 kids to 3 kids, again, it's 10 times the work. But going from 3 to 4 is like, meh, whatever.
Yeah, the system's already in place.
And then after that, you just keep adding kids on and then they just kind of start to take care of each other. Once I'm making 150 meals, what's another 30 meals? And actually, it's like symbiotic. So some of the frozen meals that we give to like the shelter and what we're going to be giving to the Wyndham House, it is actually helpful to us because we will have extras or we'll have a little bit too much of things constantly. And we don't want to waste. We don't want to throw things away. So to then be able to pass that on to other organizations is like, it's this perfect little match made in heaven. And I realize there's one really important thing that I haven't mentioned, which is that we only work with raw foods. So we don't take food that's like already cooked or prepared. We don't take leftovers.
Right.
We take raw ingredients.
Something I wanted to ask you about was that you'd recently received $20,000 for your work. Can you talk about how this will help you expand or improve your initiatives and what kind of immediate impact the community could expect from that?
Sure. So we got $20,000 from this Oak Tree Fund. It was an application. A bunch of people applied and it was like sort of like a pitch contest a little bit. And so we got the $20,000. I will say that like that money's been spent, Jordan. We're so desperate for money just to like keep the lights on basically and keep going. That's just, it's not big money. It sounds like a lot, but it's not.
Well, it also sounds like you're doing a lot.
We are doing a lot.
It's not surprising.
Like our monthly costs are between $8,000 and $12,000 a month.
Wow,
that's what it costs to run community food. So $20,000 isn't a lot of money.
No, just weeks. Really, just a few weeks of what it takes to run it all, right?
Yeah.
So speaking of that need, I've read and understood about some of your need for space and a walk-in fridge. So how does storage and logistics constraints affect your ability to serve the community?
I am only limited by the resources that I have. So we work with some amazing community partners. One of them is the Seed, and the Seed is a food rescuer and food security initiative in Guelph. They do amazing work. But one of the things that they have is they have a huge warehouse that has a very large walk-in fridge and walk-in freezer. And so they actually provide us with storage there. So that is our main storage location for all of our raw ingredients. And then we work out of a small commercial kitchen in a church that you come to on Tuesdays at the Church of the Apostles, 86 Glasgow. It's a certified kitchen. So it's, all above board health-wise. But it's small. So my logistics person, basically their job is to move things back and forth.
And there must always be uneven amounts of, like you have people like me who say, oh, I can come in on this day. But what happens when 10 people say they come in on that day and another day there's no one there? But the work still has to be done.
Yeah, right? I mean, we just overschedule.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure like you've probably come in and been like, oh, there's so many people here. And then sometimes there's way less people. I mean, you come on a Tuesday, which Tuesday is a busy day. We have a lot of people on Tuesdays. But yeah, we have amazing volunteers. We're so lucky to have really committed people who show up every week. And it's like, it's their thing. It's one of the things that they do in their life. And it's like part of their community and their family. And
I said this in the last podcast, but talking about volunteering, where I wish I had known more, like when I was younger in my life, that energy you give to volunteering, it's not a net loss because you gain so much. Like even just a day that if you weren't going to be doing anything like quote unquote productive, starting your day with volunteering can just empower you for the rest of the day to do more for yourself because you've already got that jump start. And we are social creatures that need people, and we feel good when we feel like we've contributed to something as a group. And there's like fewer things that directly fulfill that for us than working with people to create food together.
It really does. It literally feeds you. But yeah, like, and I can say for myself, as a young person, I did volunteer. And I would say that my most valuable experiences that have led me to where I am in my career are a direct result of my volunteer experiences.
It's so...
As a young person, it is like, that is how you learn. That is how you gain the skills and the knowledge and the information to figure out like where and what you want to do.
Yeah, I found it very rewarding. And I guess so, speaking of the volunteers that are there, I'm curious, did you as a chef have to learn when you're running a commercial kitchen and you're in charge, how you treat people? Because I can't imagine you being like a tyrant as a boss in the kitchen. Like there's going to be a different relationship when you're like, hey, employee, I need you to do this, or I need you to do this different or do this better, versus when you're working with volunteers and there's that flexibility that you sort of have to have with their capacity to give what they can. But at the end of the day, like logistically, you're still putting out fires and trying to respond to things. So has that been a learning experience for you, or something that's fit in well with experience that you already had going into it?
I think that is just a thing for me that is inherent. I like people. I like working with people. I like meeting new people. As we joke in my family, I am naturally bossy. I got my first like management job when I was like 21 years old, and they told me that I had a naturally bossy way, and like that's
they only said bossy because you're a woman.
Yeah,
if you were you're a natural leader.
Exactly,
leader versus bossy.
100%. Thank you for that. I would say I am a natural leader, and I understand people, and I like people, and I understand how to like motivate people, and I would say working with employees versus volunteers, for me it's one and the same. In fact, I personally prefer to work with volunteers. Just coming from the food industry, it is a hard work environment. It is harsh, and not everybody is there because they want to do it. Like a lot of people in the food world, they're there because they need a job. They have to do it. Yeah. For some people, it's the only job they could find. Whereas with volunteers, volunteers want to be there. They are choosing to be there. So it's dreamy for me. As a chef, like it's very, working in the industry, it's a very high turnover environment.
You're burning through people.
Yes.
Like whether they
just because people aren't like, I want to be a line cook, like this is my dream, is to work every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. for the rest of my life for $12 an hour. Like, no. So it's really about, so I would say that it's very similar, like volunteers versus cooks or employees. It's about like making sure that people are having a positive experience, that they feel useful, and that, they're learning, that they're growing, or that it's providing, some kind of fulfillment to them. I guess the main thing with volunteers is that if they don't feel useful or engaged or like they're needed, they'll just leave.
Right. Versus if you're getting a paycheck for it, then it's like, well, what do you care? Like, you're not going to leave unless you're that particular type of person who's only motivated by.
And our volunteers, I would say the volunteers that we get are very much people who like, they want to work. They want to do something with their time. They don't want to just like sit at a desk and answer a phone once every 20 minutes. Yeah. Like volunteers want to feel useful. So a lot of the people who end up with us come to us because they're like, well, I had another gig, but didn't really feel like I was doing anything. I was just sitting there. Like they want to be busy. They want to do work. I think the biggest thing about working with volunteers is versus employees is like to really find out where people fit in and what they're good at and what they like to do, and sort of give them tasks accordingly. Because when it's an employee, it's like, okay, you're going to get trained on everything and you have to do everything. Whereas a volunteer, they're there by choice. Like, I don't want to make a volunteer do a thing that they hate.
Right.
Like if once in a while they have to do they have to peel onions, that's okay. But it's like Ken, right? Like Ken will peel onions for 3 hours and he doesn't give a fuck. Like he will do anything and he like is happy to do whatever. But some people might be like, oh, I don't want to peel onions. So then it's like, okay, well, let's find them a job that they're going to like and also that they're good at. Because some people are also like, people have their skills. So it's about like figuring out, where people fit in. And some people are more adaptable than others.
I think that's the skill of a natural leader like that is being able to make those sorts of decisions without even like some of it's almost unconscious, right? Like you're just moving people around and moving people through tasks, and it's keeping that balance of if someone's bored, if someone's aggravated, and you're balancing all of those emotions too. Like that's
and like getting to know people, and that's the people part where I'm like, I love people. I love meeting new people, even people I disagree with. Like to me, people are like infinitely interesting. Like I'm fascinated by humans and like what's their story and what makes them tick and like why did they do this and what are the experiences that have like led them here. And
well, I hope that people do. It's so easy for us to isolate ourselves into bubbles, social bubbles, work bubbles, whatever, of media bubbles of only hearing from people you already agree with. But I hope that people are listening to this podcast that, you know, maybe at the beginning you mentioned some like anti-capitalist things, and I mention anti-capitalist things in every episode, but some people might hear that and go like, whoa, like they have ideas about what that means to them, negative opinions that maybe they've grown up with. But then I hope that they continue listening and they hear the whole story and they say, oh, there's a lot that they have in common with you. There's a lot that they resonate. Like when you really listen to people, it's hard not to find all the commonalities, and then you maybe understand where they're coming from, or even if you disagree with them, right? That there's so much more that you do agree with, or that,
100%.
So speaking of volunteers, can you speak to the importance of like partnerships? Maybe some partnerships that you also have with Guelph's Our Food Future, or other organizations like that. The importance in those partnerships helping you achieve the more, to use some of your words, the circular, sustainable food system.
Yeah, so I would say that this is a program built entirely on relationships that I've made with humans. And yeah, like I have direct relationships with at the Guelph Food Bank, at the Seed, which is part of the Community Health Center, with some of the farmers at Ignatius, Hope House. I'm sure I'm forgetting people. Yeah, they're integral to my existence. And basically, like, community food is built to have a symbiotic relationship with other food security groups, to basically come in, because we access all of our raw ingredients and supplies through food security groups that exist. So we don't go directly to grocery stores or distributors. We go to the food bank and we say to the food bank, like, hey, what do you have that you need to give us? And like, so I get text messages from Carolyn at the food bank, like for example, last Tuesday, she was like, I have, 60 buckets of this bocconcini cheese. How many do you want? And I was like, cool, I'll send someone over. We'll take 30 buckets because I'm filling a gap.
Yeah.
Right. Because they get large when they get something, and same with the Seed, when they get something that's like in a container or in a packaging that's not user friendly for like a family or for a person, and they don't have the resources or the time to repackage things, to redistribute it, they can give it to us instead of having to compost it. Or like, a lot of, like, I know both the food bank and the Seed have like a farmer that they like, the farmer drops off a bin and they can put food in there that they feed to their pigs, which is great. But, people want to try and feed humans before the farmer having to, also there's so much.
Yeah.
Pigs can only eat so much.
And that sort of specialization really means that you can focus on what you're good at.
Yeah.
And the food bank people can focus on what they're good at, but you're all, rather than everyone trying to be a master of everything, right?
It's like a network, and so that's part of that whole like circular economy thing. The circular economy business, so Guelph won this grant for $10 million in 2016. I don't know. It was a Smart Cities Challenge. They won $10 million to start Canada's first circular food economy. And that was how we got our initial funding. And it was just me. I went to a meeting with all these people and was like, hey, you should give us money for this program. And my program fit really perfectly into this idea of the circular food economy. And a circular food economy is just, instead of take, make, waste, we're closing the loop, basically, instead of discarding.
Right. Instead of
and I think that it's like being circular as opposed to linear, which is, it's like upcycling, even like vintage, for example, like used clothing stores, that's circular.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of like clothing being thrown away, it goes somewhere and gets redistributed.
Yeah.
It's to avoid waste.
So, I mean, throughout this conversation, we've talked about a lot of the good that community food and your efforts are doing. If listeners want to support community food, and what can they do? Whether if they're interested in supporting through, like, they have money or they have time, what are different ways that you would advise people to?
Yeah, so a big push that we're having right now is that we need help with people fundraising for us. So, like through your school or concerts or whatever it is. I know sometimes people are looking for a charity to donate funds to. So that's a thing that we're trying to really encourage people is to fundraise for us. We really we need money real bad, like lots of charities and food security groups. And so if you want to run a fundraiser for us or your staff Christmas party, instead of collecting for the Humane Society, like this year, you could collect for community food, and then next year do the Humane Society again. You know what I mean? Like, so that's
they can also cater their Christmas party through you.
Yes. And then, so that's another thing is that people can also hire us to cater events. And do like community events. We do some events, like we do Guelph Family Pride. I'm queer, so I want to support all things queer in Guelph. So we do the food for Pride. We did food at Praise the Ward. We are not a traditional vendor like other food businesses. Like, we're not a food business. So it's a little bit different. But if you need someone to provide food for a community event and people can donate to us, that's great. We just can't be somewhere where there's a bunch of vendors, because we don't charge a price for our food. It feels very unethical for me to say it's pay what you can. Meanwhile, over there, so-and-so's selling a burrito for $12, and absolutely you should go and buy the burrito there for $12. I don't want to undercut my comrades, Has
that ever come up in terms of like colleagues or comrades, as you said, comrades in the food business who feel like, oh, if you're providing something and it's a pay as you can, are you taking the money? I guess you can't look at it that way.
I don't. Well, yeah, absolutely. I don't do events where there is food for sale.
Right.
That's what I was explaining. Yeah.
That's fair then?
Because it doesn't feel ethical.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah.
But like if somebody's doing an event and they want to have food there, and like, for example, like we did the Shelldale family picnic a few years ago, so instead of people having to like get their own, and that's what happened at Pride, it was like every year Family Pride, they would like rent a barbecue and get volunteers, and someone go to Costco and buy whatever. And then, instead of that, like we'll set up the food, we'll serve delicious food, and then people can just donate to us. And then you guys don't have to deal with the logistics of serving food to a crowd. Cause that's the other thing about us. Like you can call us in for community things. We're here to provide the services. Like on Saturday, we got a call at the last minute, which normally we don't do last minute things, but there was a fundraiser benefit at the Guelph Farmers Market on Saturday night for Mel, who is a young woman who died recently. And someone else was supposed to do food, but for various reasons, it didn't work out. So they called us, and I was like, okay, we'll do it. And we just showed up, and then so that there was food at the event, so that there was something. So yeah, that's a way to support us. And then, you can hire us for catering. If you want to volunteer, we're usually looking for volunteers in the kitchen. We're quite full, but we can always use an extra hand here or there. If you want to help volunteer with, I don't know, social media or grant writing or, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. No matter what your skills, even if you're not comfortable in the kitchen, like you said, there's probably, if you could have someone editing social media videos or putting together posts, like these are all things that would give more time back in your day.
100%. Yeah. And then also, like, if you want to bring me in to talk, like, you can pay me, and that money would go to community food to like talk about, food security or my program about revolution. I
was just going to ask about educational pieces, because you've also, I've seen you I think it was an educational talk at 10C that you were giving.
Oh, it was a cooking class. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I teach cooking classes.
Is that considered part of community food, or is that?
It depends on the location.
Yeah.
It depends on the scenario. A lot of the time with a cooking class, you're hiring Chef Yasi to do a cooking class. I'm an experienced chef instructor. I love teaching cooking classes, actually. It's like my favorite thing in the world to do. And actually working in the community food kitchen every day with volunteers is the
That's what I was just going to say. Like,
thing.
I feel like I've gotten some of that benefit without having to pay for a class.
100%. You learn
being as a volunteer,
so much.
like watching you combine ingredients, and then like you're always you're always eager to share your knowledge too. If anyone asks, or if I ask, you'll provide some of the theory behind why you're making the decisions that you are to combine ingredients and balance food and that. But well, thanks so much for talking to me today. This has been a great conversation. I'm sure there'll be links to a lot of the stuff that we talked about for if people want to explore more ways that they can give back. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me, and hope that the community continues to empower you to do this, because I think it's important work, and I think you're the person to do it. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's fun to talk about all this stuff. Listen to my voice on the headset.
I'm sure others have enjoyed listening to your voice too. So. Thanks for listening to Growing Guelph. I've been your host, Jordan Sloggett. Be sure to subscribe to us on social media, on your favorite podcast app, and if you have a recommendation for a future guest you'd like me to speak to, you can reach out to me at growingguelph@gmail.com.